Hey, Matt, you want to start another fight on the internet and talk about firearms in a fantasy setting?
Tonight, we explore things that go click, click, boom.
That's how we roll. 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 Welcome to the Goblin's Corner. My name is Eric.
And I'm Matt.
And tonight,
we're talking about firearms in fantasy settings.
That's right. Firearms and explosives.
Yes, that's true.
This evening, we have scoured the pits of hell, otherwise known as Twitter.
Sure.
And kind of looked for other things that irritate people in games. And surprisingly, you would find in a fantasy setting that firearms and guns happen to be one of them.
It's one of those things.
Very strong opinions for and against.
Yes.
And so tonight, we're going to teach you guys how to run firearms and explosives in a fantasy setting for more flavor and more impact. And I would just dare say more boom. For
I like the more impact. That works too.
Pound for pound, you're going to get some decent stories out of this using firearms in your campaign.
And explosives.
So if you haven't yet, hit that like and subscribe button. Help us get our show out to more people and get notified when amazing episodes come your way.
Every week he says, I'm not going to do the fingers anymore, and every week he still does.
Finger gun it all.
If you're listening to the show, give us a review on iTunes or Podchaser or wherever you're listening to the show from.
Yeah, before we blow up.
I don't want to blow up.
Oh, hopefully the show will blow
I'm
up.
a Toys R Us kid.
There you go. So, bombs, you say, Matt?
I do indeed.
Why are we talking about bombs and explosives and firearms in a fantasy setting?
Because we like contentious subjects, and this is certainly one of them for a lot of people.
Yeah, people feel very strongly about this, and I find that both fascinating and somewhat worrying. So arguing about something that happens in a fantasy game, that's fine.
Sure.
It's been way overpowered or way underpowered in rules, typically.
Yes, and in various editions, there have been very grievous plus and minuses to each of them.
And it's kind of funny because if you just use a little bit of logic, you can literally kill a dragon with a donkey.
Yes.
And in fact, you have one donkey, one cart full of alchemical fire equals a dead dragon.
Yes.
According to D&D math.
Yeah. Basic math states that even a very big dragon that's not immune to fire has X number of hit points. If you put that many vials into the cart and just ride it into the dragon's territory,
he's going to die.
You
have dead dragons everywhere. Tasty dragons, because the alchemical fire has roasted the dragon nicely. Delicious dragon meat. Jerky, I might say.
I think white dragons, you have to use less because otherwise they'll burn.
That's a good point. And you want that flavor.
Exactly.
What we're saying here is gunpowder isn't any more powerful than alchemical fire or alchemist lightning or, honestly, that wand of fireball your wizard happens to have lying around someplace that they never use except in last minute. What is it? The beads?
The beads of fireball.
Sure. Yeah. And plus, another reason we're talking about this to put in a fantasy setting is because your characters are going to want them.
Yeah. Some people like having guns in a fantasy setting.
And gunslingers are awesome.
Yes.
You know what else is awesome, Matt?
GIF.
GIF are awesome.
I love them. Little hippo men with the little happy ears.
And in my head, they sound like British admirals.
Absolutely. I mean, that's how
His Majesty's Navy. The most posh with the mustache. Yeah, very major model of a modern major general. You know what I mean? Like that old guy. That's what they sound like in my head.
Preposterous.
Yeah, highway robbery. But also, consider the following scenario. The wizard strides into the center of town, confident in his ability to mage duel the PC. Right?
Sure.
It's your typical big bad, right? Yeah. We'll get to that in a minute. He raises an evil-looking wand at the player who is just standing there with a smile on their face. Beware, pitiful adventurer, for soon you shall face the wrath of... And that's about all he gets because the character pulls out a revolver and in a fluid motion sends him to the afterlife.
Sometimes you just got to shoot a bad guy in the face.
Sometimes you got to blow somebody's face off.
It's like that.
It's fun. So, the point we're getting at is what, Matt?
What's the problem with guns? Really? What is the problem?
You may have a moral objection to playing with guns in your fantasy campaign. And you know what? That's fine. That's what a session 0 is for, right?
Sure. And even that, I'm not going to understand. If you're okay with shooting someone with a bow, there's no difference at that point.
We're just talking about speed at that point, really. Because really, it's not about how much damage these things do, although we hear that a lot in forums as well. Well, guns do a lot more damage than the typical bow. Dude, there's magic.
Exactly.
Wizards are crazy. We've said this many times on our podcast before. Wizards are crazy.
Explain that too much damage to the lightning bolt.
Yeah. When you have a guy throwing fireballs, you're going to want to answer that with a fireball.
Yeah. Sooner or later, people who deal in the alchemy side of things are going to come up with an answer to people who deal with the magic side of things.
Mm-hmm.
That's just logic. If you're attempting to apply any kind of logic to your fantasy world, that's going to be part of it.
You may say that, well, historically they weren't accurate. However, there's a lot of historical accuracy in firearms in medieval settings, certainly. But even before that, right?
Yeah.
So here's a couple of history lessons just from our world.
Yes.
Not counting, your fantasy with magic and gnomes and
elves that live for 1,200 years.
Sure. First off, fireworks have been around since the 2nd century BC.
Naphtha was discovered in the 1st century AD.
That's before full plate. Black powder was discovered in the 1st century AD.
Greek fire has been around since 600 AD.
And the most common method for that was to use it as a grenade.
So like an explosive?
So we're saying it's historically accurate to have grenades in your fantasy campaign. You want to go up against a dragon? Now you've got even more reason to play an artificer.
Yep.
Straight up. Throw some grenades. Pathfinder did it. They got a whole class. They've had a whole class.
The Grenadier?
Yes. It's great. Play Goblin.
Yes. We've got explosives.
Yeah. Goblin Sapper from Warcraft.
Yeah.
The first firearm appeared roughly 300 years before the first plate mail.
Yes.
Think about that.
That is my continuous argument against all of the whole, oh, well, firearms shouldn't be in a fantasy. If plate mail is in a fantasy game, if you have the ability to make plate mail, you have the ability to make firearms.
People have been blowing up for a long time. Exactly. So now that all of you who are listening or watching are on board with our argument,
who haven't just shut us off out of sheer hatred for the topic,
blocked it just out of their minds and such, let's talk about incorporating firearms and explosives into your campaign.
Okay.
Maybe you're not playing, say, Eberron, which has it.
Right.
Maybe you are playing Forgotten Realms, which really the only people that have guns are
the Gond.
Yeah, the Gondsmen.
Yep.
People who follow the god of
and
invention.
there's a otherwise theoretically, according to the old lore at least, there is a deific stricture against black powder in Forgotten Realms.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we're about to lift that restriction.
Yep, we don't believe in that here.
Yeah. Plus, if you're playing Spelljammer, you got to have some guns because you got to have GIF.
Yes.
GIF love their bombards too, my friends.
I was about to say, and bombards.
Yeah.
It's a necessity.
So first off, I would say the best thing you could do is to pick a genre that makes sense to have guns and explosives in it, which, as we've kind of gotten around to the point, is every genre.
Right. Unless you're playing a Stone Age campaign.
Then it doesn't make sense to have a boomstick.
Right. But short of that, they've been around for a long time.
So Matt, what are a couple of genres that work really well with gunplay? I mean, yes, every one of them, but, a couple that really work well.
Steampunk.
Steampunk is great.
Yeah, it's pretty much a necessity. Renaissance era.
Mm-hmm. And that could be a flintlock pistol.
Sure. High fantasy. Once again, if you've got people throwing fireballs, you're going to want to be able to shoot them in the face.
Yeah, a pea shooter's not going to really do much damage against the dude that's literally casting meteor swarm.
Right. Pirate campaigns.
You gotta
have pirate setting.
Gotta have cannons in pirates.
Yep, and you gotta have pistols that you can whip out and shoot people with.
Absolutely,
it's a necessity.
Gotta have a cutlass and an eye patch and a parrot named Steve.
Sure.
Look, it's my campaign. I gotta have a parrot named Steve. Culture where magic is either taboo, which is a great way to add in a little bit of that exotic element with pistols and firearms.
Yep, that's their answer to an otherwise fantastic setting.
Or you have a demographic that are unable to use magic for some reason, whether it's because they physically can't do magic or
they've been forbidden to by a god or what have you.
Another question you should ask yourself is, how prolific are firearms and explosives in your campaign? What are we talking about, Matt, when we're saying how prolific something is?
You've got a couple options. One of them is things like laws and permits. Are you required to have laws and permits? But the other thing is, if a culture is the culture that invented firearms, how far have they moved into the rest of the world?
Yes.
Both of those are a form of proliferation.
So this could be something along the lines of, this is technology that maybe only the ruling class has.
Sure.
Or it could be something only the criminals have. That would also be fun, too.
Yeah, like the old pistol crossbows. Those were used basically strictly for assassination. And so realistically, only criminals carried them.
That makes sense to me.
Same could go for firearms.
Absolutely, yeah. Another thing to consider is, how easy is it to get ammunition and gunpowder? It could be very easy, just mining some rock, mixing all the proper ingredients and such. Or it may be very difficult if you're living in a place that doesn't have those types of mineral resources to produce explosives. Although, given human history, people are very inventive.
It's true, but getting good sulfur's tough to do if you're not in a place that has it.
Yeah, I'm not a chemist, so I'm not real sure about that.
I will not expand upon that.
Please, Internet, feel free to enlighten us on how hard it is to get sulfur. How are they viewed by the general populace in terms of firearms or explosives, right? So you could be good or bad, right? Good, I would say, is the great equalizer.
Everybody else has power. Now we have easy power also.
Absolutely. Bad, in terms of the cons, it's the great equalizer.
Right. Even though we've got power, everybody else also has power.
Absolutely.
Depends on which side of that statement you're standing on.
You know, that's the thing
or which side of the firearm you're standing on.
But again, you could make that argument for anything in a fantasy.
For literally any type of
Clerical
power.
magic has been 100% said to be overpowered in a fantasy campaign setting.
Sure.
Compared to like even mages in many ways.
Yeah. Because end of the day, death doesn't have to mean anything as long as you've got gold and a cleric.
Get a couple diamonds, you can just res another day.
Yep.
So it's just something to think about. And then finally, what are we talking about when we're building this into a campaign?
One of the things you've got to ask yourself is, what firearms and explosives are you allowing? Just because you're allowing firearms doesn't mean that your
adding a
rogue
Glock.
Has an AK-47. That's not necessarily what we're talking about here. All funny, but not what we're talking about.
You know, not to paraphrase Ice Cube or anything, I think it would be a great day if my wizard had to use his AK.
Sure.
That would be fun.
Wizard with an AK? Sure, why not?
God, that would be awesome.
But there's a big difference between a flintlock and a revolver.
Yes.
And the more modern the gun, the more problematic it can be in a fantasy setting.
So one of those ways to work around those potential pitfalls of having modern weapons or all sorts of weapons in your campaign is to just have, I don't know, like a list of firearms and explosives with specific rules. Wait a minute. They have those rules. It's called the Dungeon Master's Guide. What page is that on, Matt?
For 5e, it's on page 267 and 268 of the DMG.
There you go. There are rules that you can use to run this. And
it actually goes through the different age categories of weapons, from flintlocks all the way to laser weapons.
Yes, to laser weapons. You want laser guns in your fantasy campaign? Sure, you could do it.
It's in a couple of the old modules.
Didn't Icewind Dale have a laser gun in it from the crashed Nautiloid with the Nomelithids?
I think so. The squidlings?
The squidlings, yes. Those were such delightful little cute things. I know they're going to bite off your face and suck out your brains, but still.
But I'd rather it be from a cute little one.
Yeah, they're so adorable. So pick some weapons that fit your campaign. It doesn't have to be all of them. It really can only be one or two of them if you want it to be. But pick what works for your game and what your story, and talk to your players about this stuff before you even start.
But once again, it's a session zero kind of question.
Yeah.
Do you want them or don't you?
Because firearms are cool in a fantasy game.
Yeah.
Speaking of other things that are cool in a fantasy game, we've got what, Matt?
Question of the week.
Yes. So what cool question do you have for me this time? I bet it's gun related.
It is, or explosives. I can go either way on it.
I'm good with either of those.
Tonight we're going to talk about aesthetic choices.
Okay.
what is your aesthetic choice for a gun, for guns or explosives? For example, something like a Way of the Gun Monk, gun fu, or a gun artificer, maybe a Mandalorian style gun cleric, or even just a big game hunter with walking around with your big old cannon.
I only have one answer for this.
Sure. That's a little startling.
It's very simple.
I'm not sure I'm okay with it.
Tetragrammaton Cleric from the movie Equilibrium. There you go. That's my style. If I'm going to play with guns, I'm going to be a Tetragrammaton Cleric.
All right.
The gun fu katas.
I haven't seen it.
I'll show you the videos. It's awesome.
I've seen some of the clips, and it is cool. For me, I think I would do the slightly unstable alchemist from anime that's got like the bomb in each hand.
The crazy old guy that's chucking explosives.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, I love that. You know what else? Goblin Sapper, of course, is personal favorite for both of ours as well. I
would put those into the same character. Like I would want it to be like just an old goblin that doesn't even care anymore. He's like, have a bomb.
Yeah, he's got like one arm and one leg. The others are mechanical because he's blown himself up. There's scars all over him.
3 fingers.
Yeah. Looks like some dude that taught shop class. Yeah, that's awesome. I love that. Of course, we're always interested in your answer to the question of the week. If you'd like to answer that and tell us why it also is the Tetragrammaton Cleric, hit us up at Goblin's Corner on Twitter or Mastodon, and of course, all of the various social media channels that we happen to post to.
You can also comment down below if you're watching this on YouTube. That's what the comments are for.
Yeah, comment on that YouTube video. Make it blow up.
Nice.
Speaking of blowing up, let's talk about some sample explosives and firearms because we know you're a busy person. You're listening to this podcast on your way to work.
Probably.
And you're like, I don't have time to look up in the DMG where the hell this thing on guns and stuff is. That's okay. We've got it for you. We've got some rules here, and we've got some that we've made ourselves.
Yeah, we're going to give it a quick rundown for things like what the damage is, what the range is, what some of the properties are, so that if you just need a quick reference, you can check us out, and we got you.
And we've got 4 easy-to-digest categories. We've got guns, big guns, explosives, and then rules on blowing up.
Yeah.
That's my favorite category.
That's both of our favorite categories.
Yeah. So let's talk a little bit about some guns, Matt.
All right. Flintlocks or otherwise. This one's pretty easy. It, like we said, it is in the DMG on 267, 268.
Yeah, literally on that page.
The pistol is 1d10 piercing, and the range is 30-90. It has the loading property.
What does that mean, Matt?
That means it takes either an action or a bonus action to reload the weapon. Every round.
Again, you have to take an action or a bonus action to reload. You're in the middle of a battle. 1d10 piercing is not a whole hell of a lot of damage.
Right. It's
One
almost
half.
like it's slower than a bow.
Yeah, or way slower than, I don't know, some guy with a sword.
Sure.
So, granted, the range is nice.
It's also lower than a bow, though.
A warlock that can blast all day long. Think about it, folks.
Yeah.
And, all right, so what? Let's talk about maybe something a little bit longer range. All right, rifle or a musket.
That's going to be 1d12 piercing.
4120 for the range.
Right.
And then it also has the loading property. Again, 120 feet, great, but that's most spells. And again, a warlock with
Eldritch Blast.
Yeah, Eldritch Blast.
And still shorter than a longbow.
Absolutely. What about some room sweepers, Matt? They got shotguns.
Yes, as they should. 2d8 piercing with a 30-90 range, and you have to reload it, but it gets 2 shots.
Ooh, so 2 attacks. That's nice. 2d8 is nice.
Yeah.
But I have a druid that turns into a bear that can do way more damage than that. He's only 3rd level.
That's true. He's 4th level now.
Oh, well,
ooh,
there we go. Fancy now. I'll break out my tea set.
Oh, just the picture of your druid as a bear with a tiny little tea set is awesome. Somebody draw that, please.
Yeah, speaking of which, my druid is a kobold, so it's even better. He looks like a tiny little emerald dragon. Let's talk a bit about revolvers. Let's say you want to add some modern weapons into your campaign. Revolver's a good kind of intermediary between that and, AKs.
Yeah.
Although a wizard with an AK,
it's a good day.
If you didn't have to use it, wizards don't have to use an AK. They've got Fireball.
And Meteor Swarm. So
these are modern weapons. Use them if you want them, but what does a revolver do in terms of damage, Matt?
2d8 piercing, 40-120,
Okay.
and the reload is 6 shots because it's a revolver.
Yeah. And of course, the more modern they get, generally the longer the range, the more damage they do, yada, yada.
Sure.
Scale this up or down. I don't recall the ones in Pathfinder, but they're pretty similar if I remember correctly.
I believe that is correct.
Now let's talk about big guns.
Yeah.
You're a GIF on a boat without gunpowder. What do? You dive overboard to find some
That's
gunpowder.
true. I board a ship that has gunpowder.
And make it my own.
Exactly.
Yeah, exactly. Ram the whole damn thing into somebody else's ship. Because that's what a GIF would do. Bombards and cannons, the GIF's favorite weapon. If they could literally carry a bombard, they would. And I believe one of their guns in Spelljammer is basically a small bombard.
Yeah, it's like a shoulder-mounted cannon.
It's great. How much does a bombard do? Or a cannon?
8d10 bludgeoning damage.
But keep in mind they're large-sized weapons, like
Right.
ship weapons.
It also takes 3 actions to fire. 1 to load,
Mm-hmm.
1 to aim, and 1 to fire. And that is 3 actions.
So you've got to have 3 crew if you want to fire it once a round.
Yes.
And if you don't got 3 crew, say you've boarded this vessel and made off with it. The authorities are chasing you.
It's going to take you 3 rounds to
Hard
fire.
to
after.
port. Fire the main bombards. And you got like a crew of 3. And they're like, well, I'm steering the ship. This guy here is up on the decks.
Fine, I'll fire. Just give me some time.
He's
Give me
round
18
1,
seconds.
he's loading. Yeah. Bows are just kind of, the arrow shots are just arcing overhead gracefully. He's aiming. They're now raining onto the ship,
Sure.
peppering everybody with just spray. And finally he fires it in his dying breath because he got hit, just riddled with arrows.
The good thing about it, though, is the range.
What's the range on a bombard?
600, 2400.
Okay, so that's pretty far.
Yeah. So those arrows aren't going to make it in time.
So he could literally just go along the row and then just load everything, aim them properly, and fire.
Yeah.
That's what you do, the cartoon thing where all of them have the same wick.
Yes. I was literally thinking that just one long wick that you touch with the torch.
Players, you're welcome.
Yes.
Your DMs, we're sorry.
We're sorry.
Yeah. Now on to the thrown explosive weapons, Matt.
Let's start with the most classic.
The oldie but goodie,
Yes.
alchemical fire.
It's 50 gold pieces. It does 1d4 fire damage to a creature.
Mm-hmm.
Has a 20-foot range, so the range is not great.
Sure.
And it's a DC 10 dex check to extinguish.
Now, it should be noted that it will burn until you extinguish it.
Yet technically, it is not written that it has a time frame. So theoretically, it will burn for eternity.
But that's 50 gold piece, and it's not going to burn for eternity. Any DM with the right mind would be like, no.
I'm going to be, that's raw.
It's going to burn for like a couple rounds and then be done. Unless the person is made of paper,
Sure.
or he has some really nice ropes.
A wood golem.
A wood golem. Yeah, burns super nice. Honestly, a flesh golem probably would roast fairly well also.
Delicious.
Delicious. Smells like stinking death. Bombs. They have bombs in D&D, Matt.
Yeah, just bomb. You know, I picture like the classic black round
The cartoon
bomb. Yeah,
bomb
absolutely.
with the big wick, and it has like an X on it.
Yeah, or the word bomb written across it.
Yeah.
Either way.
I totally see that as well. 3d6 fire damage in a 5-foot radius. Not bad.
Yeah.
Again, DC 12 this time for the dex. 60-foot range because you could toss it a little bit further.
Yeah.
I don't get that.
It's a shot put.
Okay.
It doesn't make sense, but that's my only argument.
I could throw a beer bottle 60 feet.
Sure.
And that's all alchemical fire is.
I don't know what to tell you, man.
Maybe that 50 gold to spend on it makes it way longer.
It's weighed down by the gold price.
I guess. I don't know.
Maybe it's a flimsy glass vial.
Oh, good point.
And so you can't chuck it, otherwise it might burst in your hand.
Yeah, like napalm or something like that. You don't want to get that on you.
Yep. That's sure. We'll go with that.
Why not? They also have sticks of dynamite, Matt, which is great.
Sure.
3d6 bludgeoning in a 5-foot area. That's, a fistful of backstab right there.
Yeah. Nice little kidney punch.
Yeah. DC 12 dex again, 60-foot range again, just like the bomb.
Right.
But what is really cool about dynamite, Matt?
Stackable.
What do you mean by that?
Each stick adds 1d6 points of damage up to 10d6.
So up to a fireball range.
Yes.
Can be a little pricey, though.
It's true, but it's also timeable
Ooh.
because you can add more fuse. So you can have a delayed blast fireball. I personally would argue that it's force damage for anybody that's ever been concussed.
Sure. Yeah, it's going to blow you off your feet with that.
Yep. But it's delightful. Now you have a delayed blast concussive fireball.
So when the Umberhawk comes charging into the cave, you bring the entire cave around the Umberhawk.
Yes.
Just got to time that fuse right. Engineering check. And finally, we have grenades. Just straight up grenades.
Yeah. Who doesn't love grenades?
Everybody loves grenades, and they do even more than a stick of dynamite. 5d6. This time it's piercing because I guess they break
fragmentation.
Sure.
Yeah.
20-foot radius. The DC check is 15. And again, 60-foot range unless launched.
Yes.
What can you launch it in? Use your imagination. There is a particular spell. I believe it's called Catapult.
It is. Also, you could use a sling.
You could, in fact, use a sling.
If you're a terrible human being like myself.
Or have a fly speed and just drop them on people.
Sure.
That'd be a lot of fun as well.
And now we come to the fun part.
Oh, are we going to talk about blowing up?
Absolutely.
Yes, let's talk about blowing stuff up. There are some amazing things you can do to blow stuff up. The DMG has gunpowder, for example. Just straight up gunpowder.
Yep.
Like powder kegs and powder horns.
Yep.
Gunpowder, it's 250 gold.
For a keg.
For a whole keg. That's one of those big round, like, barrels, right?
Yes.
What kind of damage does it do?
7d6 fire damage in a 10-foot radius with a DC 12.
Okay. Again, not particularly crazy for that much gold.
No,
I could buy several scrolls that do way more damage than that.
Yes.
But it wouldn't be as spectacular as blowing up an entire keg of gunpowder. That would be awesome.
It's true. You can also get a horn of gunpowder.
Okay.
Which is 35 gold. Far more efficient use of your money because it does 3d6 fire damage in a 10-foot radius. Also, a DC 12 dex.
That does seem more efficient. How many horns can you get per keg?
10.
Okay, so that's way more damage.
Yes.
That's 30d6.
Yes.
As opposed to 7.
Yes.
All right, well, yeah, let's go with the horn. If you buy 10 horns of gunpowder and put them all together.
Or buy a keg of gunpowder and 10 empty horns.
And just chuck them.
Yep.
Because chucking them once per round over time is a lot more damage.
I think it really depends on whether or not you need all of this damage as quickly as possible.
Mm-hmm.
Because, sometimes you don't have 10 rounds.
Let's talk a bit about blowing up structures. Dynamite is a great thing to use to blow something up. How can we actively use explosives in a fantasy setting when you're, say, in combat? Because this is really what you'd either be using it in combat or you'd be destroying something like property.
For me, I personally, once again, this is not per the DMG, but I personally would have TNT have the siege property and do double damage against
structures and stuff like that. Yep. I would also say constructs, it probably bypasses regular damage reduction.
Sure. Yeah.
Because you're blowing stuff up, right? They're machines.
Right.
A golem is basically a magical machine.
Yeah. Make it worth the money.
Yeah. If it again, caveat this with this is your game, right? If you don't want to have those rules, don't have those rules. But if you're a DM and your players come to you like, look, I just want to play this guy with a gun.
Right.
He's got a noble background, very nice disposition, dark past. Oh, you're going with critical role? Okay, sure.
Sure.
Go ahead. Play this guy. It's fun, right? Let him blow stuff up. Let him shoot a gun, toss a couple grenades here and there. It's not really going to do any more damage than anything else.
Or have it be tragic. Like the guy was a toy maker. He was attempting to make like super efficient cork guns.
Mm-hmm.
Accidentally murdered a noble's kid, had to flee for his life. And now this weapon that he made is what he uses to survive by.
I love that idea. What a dark and weird story.
It was all an accident.
That was done in Ravenloft. Think about that. Now he's been corrupted. He becomes a Dark Lord.
The gunslinger of Ravenloft.
The evil toy maker.
Yep.
Toy maker. Something to think about for PCs. What can you blow up? Look for structures that have like a weak point.
Sure.
Don't just chuck a grenade and expect it to, like, decimate people like a fireball does. I indiscriminately throw fireballs as a wizard because it's fun.
Not you.
Yeah, I know. And it does a lot of damage, but you have to be a bit more specific when you're playing with explosives and firearms in a fantasy setting because the rules, the way that they're written right now, are not designed to do as much damage.
Right.
By any stretch. So you kind of have to maybe use a little bit of, player knowledge.
Yes.
Or have your DM or storyteller come up with maybe like some kind of engineering check as well, which I think is very useful, particularly for like buildings.
Yes, absolutely. And you could go, I guess, nature with that, or if you're in a cathedral, maybe it's a religion check.
Oh, because you would know like how it's put together?
Yeah.
That's very
Things like
interesting.
that.
I love that. In addition to just standard explosives, you can also use stuff like things that burn, anything combustible like an oil barrel.
Sure. You roll it up to a wooden palisade and set it on fire.
So we didn't find any actual rules for this, so we've come up with our own. What we're doing is we're going to treat it as gunpowder, so it does fire damage, but we're going to have the damage, but it's going to burn for 1d4 rounds.
Sure.
So if you have a barrel of oil compared to a barrel of gunpowder, half that damage.
Right. Either roll 76 and half it, or just 4d6 or 3d6, whichever you like.
Yeah, and burns for a couple rounds, call it a day, right? And you could do that whether it's oil or, I don't know, kitchen grease or some kind of magical monster that had some kind of oil slick as their blood.
Sure.
I mean, there's a lot of crazy stuff from the far realms, my friends.
Pyroclastic ooze in a bottle.
There you go. That's what we're talking about. That could be the next creature harvesting video we do, Matt.
Sure.
Just flammable monsters you can use as explosives. That'd be a lot of fun. Speaking of like magical stuff, there are also magical engines and artifacts that occasionally do blow up in games. Breaking a staff of power or something like that, for example. Bad times when you break an artifact. What happens? Depends on how powerful, right?
Sure. And it also depends on what type of artifact.
That's right. But we do have a couple of rules that we like to use. What is that?
You can average it around fireball, base the damage off of the flavor of the artifact.
So if it is some kind of nature type of artifact, it might do piercing from like shards of wood or thorns.
Sure.
If it's a cold-based artifact, it's doing cold damage.
Right.
And probably concussive.
Yeah, that's the other thing is if it doesn't necessarily have a specific flavor, just use force.
Yeah, force.
Just use force. And if it's a massive world-changing artifact that they've managed to destroy, up the damage.
Yeah.
Up the damage. It's not a fireball anymore. Maybe it's a 9th level fireball.
Or up the area.
That's another great one.
Now, let's say you want to make your own explosives. How would we go about doing that? We've got a couple of cocktails we've come up with.
Sure.
So we make a homemade grenade because I couldn't find any. Again, so we just we're improvising. How do you make a homemade grenade, Matt?
That's easy. 1 horn of gunpowder and a bag full of caltrops.
That's it. You could also use ball bearings if you're feeling froggy.
Yeah.
Put it in a vial, like a glass case, or honestly anything, really.
Yeah. You could even just literally
put it in the bag.
Yeah.
Yeah, wrap it in the bag with some sturdy rope or something, sling it around, set it on fire, toss it into the wind.
And dip.
Yeah, duck. We also have some Molotov cocktails that we've come up with. What are those, Matt?
It's 1d6 fire in a 5-foot area.
Okay.
DC 12 dex, because that seemed to be the general consensus for it. 60-foot range.
Because we're tossing Molotovs. I don't care what they say. It's not alchemical fire.
That's right. This is in a liquor bottle. It burns for 1d4 rounds.
Yeah. So it doesn't do a lot of damage, but it burns for 4 rounds because it's a Molotov, right?
Right.
And it takes a bonus action to light it.
Correct, because unlike alchemist fire, it doesn't light itself.
Yes. So if you guys want to put that into your game, go for it. We will.
Absolutely.
Probably tomorrow. Additionally, let's say that you're in a campaign and it's really hard to get guns and explosives. We've already talked about how to make some of these explosives from home.
Sure.
Just out of DMG stuff. But maybe you want to make your own flintlock pistol. How would you go about doing that, Matt?
Realistically, it's a pipe with a hole at one end. The other end is capped. You fill it with black powder and a ball bearing. You aim it You light it and you hold on tight.
Yeah. Handle is optional, but strongly encouraged.
Strongly.
And by the way, all of this being said, let's just talk about, to give a little bit of perspective, explosive magic.
Sure. That makes perfect sense.
So the oldie but goodie is the fireball. Just without any levels or anything like that, just basic casting, 8d6 fire damage in a 20-foot radius.
Right.
Nothing we have said here, with the exception of...
Bombard.
Yeah. Does that.
Right.
Erupting Earth, which is another explosive spell.
Realistically.
3d12 bludgeoning in a 20-foot cube, which, by the way, is a great spell. My druid has it. It's awesome.
It's wonderful.
And then Glyph of Warding, which does the perfect classic explosive runes.
Right. 5d8, you get to pick the damage type in a 20-foot radius.
Yeah.
That's a landmine.
So those of you saying guns and explosives are overpowered?
They're not. If you don't like them for the aesthetic choice,
we get that.
Just be honest. It has nothing to do with power creep. It has nothing to do with whether or not they are accurate to the time period. You don't like them because you don't like them. And that's fine. But let's be honest about it.
Yeah. So put them in your game because your players want them and GIF want them.
Yes.
And guns are cool in a fantasy campaign. Again, in a fantasy campaign.
Right.
The real life versions, not so much.
Less so.
So there you have it. A couple of ways to add fantasy, guns, and explosives into your campaign as well. In addition to that, a couple homemade ones that we've come up with.
Sure.
Hopefully you guys have found this to be
enlightening.
I was going to say that. Good on you to jump in on that. Any questions or comments, hit us up at Goblins Corner on Twitter or Mastodon. Did you enjoy this podcast? We've got a couple more blowing up. Subscribe to the podcast on your favorite player, YouTube and Twitch.
Click the 5 stars and give us a review on iTunes or Podchaser. And on YouTube, hit the like and subscribe button. It helps to get our show out to more people, and it feeds the hungry algorithm.
She's currently walking up smelling of naphtha with a lighter going click, 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 click.
Gust is your answer. Just no.
That's all the time we have for tonight. Once again, my name is Eric.
And I'm Matt.
We'll see you next time.
Good night, folks. The Goblins Corner has been written and produced by Eric Holden and Matt Staple.
D20 did our music.
And this has been a Subterranean production.
Later.